Alright, I got my breakfast burrito here, so jumping in on my Udemy course, trying to get through this full stack. Check out Dr. Angela Yu's Complete Web Development Bootcamp course. I've been enjoying it quite a bit. And we're in the React module. It's quite long. I already kind of know what arrow functions are, so this lecture is not going to be anything new for me, but we'll jump in here.
In this lesson,
Oh,
I want to
let me
introduce
switch
you
to
to a
audio.
new Essex concept. And that's something called arrow functions, or you might also hear people refer to it as the fat arrow. Essentially, all that arrow functions are is a shorter way of writing a JavaScript function. It's not so complicated. So go ahead and fork the starting sandbox, and let's tackle this concept of arrow functions together. Now, we've already seen quite a few ways of writing functions in JavaScript, right? Let's say I had a function. Let's create a function that just squares a number. We'll take a number, let's call it x, and then we'll return x multiplied by
I already
x.
know what arrow functions are, so I'm going to speed this up.
This is the most basic way of writing a JavaScript function, but there are other ways. So, for example, if we activate our numbers array again, whenever we've needed to use a function as an input to another function, we've also seen that it's quite helpful to use an anonymous function to make it simpler and easier to read. For example, if I wanted to loop through my numbers and I call my map function to go ahead and square each of the numbers inside that array, and then I can save this to a new array called new numbers, and then log it to the console. And we get a new array with each number being squared, so to the power of 2. This is basically us passing in this function as it is, and you've seen in the last lesson and many other lessons that we can simply just put a function inside the parentheses just as well. And we can even cut down on the width of our lines by deleting the name of our function. So now we have an anonymous function. And if we refresh our console, you can see it does exactly the same thing, but now it just doesn't have a name anymore. And because it lives inside another function, it usually doesn't need to have a name. It's usually easy enough to look at what it does and see its functionality. Now, arrow functions take it just one step further. It lets us actually delete this function keyword, and instead we replace it with a equal sign and a right angle bracket. So now these are the inputs of our function, and this is the body of our function. And the only thing that denotes that this whole thing is a function is that so-called fat arrow. Now, be careful with the syntax, because if you add a space there, then it's no longer a fat arrow. And if this is just a single line, that's also not a fat arrow. It has to be the equals and the right angle bracket combined together. Now, we can make this even shorter if we wanted to. So with arrow functions, if we have more than one input, say we had an x and a y, and we simply multiplied x by y in the body of our function, then in this case we have 2 input parameters, and we definitely need a set of parentheses around them. But if you only have one input or one parameter, you can actually just get rid of the parentheses as well. This is exactly the same as before. On top of that, if you have only a single line statement where you're only returning a single expression such as this, you can actually delete the return keyword and delete these curly braces. So you end up with inline code that looks like this. Now our map function is taking each item in our numbers array and multiplying it by itself and then creating a new array. But the syntax is now much, much shorter. And that means there are pros and cons. It might be that for a beginner coming to JavaScript, this is really hard to understand. And especially in cases where you have people on your team who are more junior, having code like this is not always great. So depending on your project, your use case, your team, your own level of comfort with this kind of shortened syntax, then you can choose to use it, but you don't have to. Just be aware that because in React we use these array functions like map, filter, reduce a lot, then in these cases, you will see a lot of people using arrow functions inside, just because it makes it so much simpler and you can achieve things just in one line. But it does take a little bit of getting used to. So as a challenge, I want you to go ahead and comment out this line of code, maybe keep it around as reference, and I want you to this current format of anonymous functions to arrow functions and to simplify them as much as you can. And once you're done with that, then go into your app.jsx and go ahead and do the same for our actual React code, where we're using the map function to create custom entry components. And if you get stuck or if you have any problems, then come back and we'll walk through the solution together. Pause the video and try to give those 2 parts of the challenge a go.
Okay, seems easy enough. I think that's the link I want. Did I do it wrong? Numbers is not defined. Oh, you have to uncomment out that. All right. There we go. I think that works. Let's make sure. Yeah. Okay. So far, so good. Filter. What does filter do? I remember. Okay. Wait, what's the condition? Num less than 10? Okay. I think that works. Let's make sure. Okay. So far, so good. Reduce. We just learned this last lesson. Accumulator, current number, return. Well, I guess I don't have to know what it is. I just have to know to convert it to arrow function. So, but I think I remember what reduce is. There's that. And then I think. Yep, that looks right. Pretty sure both of y'all are bots, but what's up anyway? New number find. Okay. Wait, what was the condition? Num greater than 10. Okay. First item, yeah, so 56 is right. Okay. Num greater than 10. Okay, so same thing. Easy enough. Although sometimes if I'm reading arrow functions, I gotta convert it back to the full thing so I know what it's actually doing. Okay, num greater than 10, the index of the first item, 0, 1, the 1 down there. All right, we're good. And then what did she say? If I do that, go back to app and do something. Let's see.
Anonymous functions to arrow functions and to simplify them as much as you can. And once you're done with that, then go into your app.jsx and go ahead and do the same for our actual React code, where we're using the map function to create custom entry components. And if you get stuck or if you have any problems,
Oh,
then come back and we'll walk through the solution together. Pause the video and try to give those two parts of the challenge a go.
I think I understand. All right, one sec. All right. So she wants us to go into, where's my app? There it is. All right. Yeah, she wants this to be an arrow function instead. Okay. Map. Entry. And then I believe all of that can just go here. Maybe not. Return. Nope, I think I did something wrong here. Okay. Want to convert this into an arrow function. So instead of using the name function up here, you want to convert it to an arrow function down here. Okay, so this is what we're actually iterating on, I guess. Okay, so let's do that. Term. Okay. So the map means for everything in that array, for everything in that array, we're going to run this arrow function. Emoji term is the variable. Can we just return entry with no props? Does that work? Okay, entry with no props works. So then, can we do key is... Okay, that works. What, isn't this the same thing I just did? Why didn't it work before? Okay, yeah, we're getting there. Nope, don't want the semicolon there. Okay. There we go. All right, I think I got it. Easy peasy. All right, and then that can be commented out since we're not using it, and there we go. Not too bad. All right.
All right, so the first one we're tackling is the old map function. And the first thing we're going to do is delete the function keyword and add a fat arrow in between the input and the body of the function. Next, we're going to see if we have multiple lines of code in our block of code. So we don't. We actually just have a...
Yeah, I know this already. I can skip it.
JSX. So here we've got a function called createEntry, which is taking each of the emoji terms that's being mapped through here and using the emoji terms properties such as ID, emoji, name, meaning, and mapping them over to a prop. The solution to this challenge is first to just cut this function and replace it inside here. And then we're going to further simplify this by removing the function keyword, adding a fat arrow, deleting the name of the function, deleting the parentheses around our single input, and then we can even go as far to delete the return keyword and the closing curly braces. And the
Oh, okay. I left return in there, but all right.
reason is because our entry component is treated as basically a single line of code. Even though they're placed on different lines, just to make it easy to read, effectively all of these props are just all on the same line, and we've only got a single element being returned, like so. So if you wanted to, you could even delete these two, but it's usually good practice in React to have a set of parentheses when you're returning a component that has many different properties. Did you manage to get this right? If not, be sure to review the early parts and make sure that you've completed each of these exercises, as well as maybe read around the topic. So there's a really good article that I linked to from the Mozilla team where they talk about arrow functions in depth, some of the history, and it's a really interesting piece of reading, and it'll give you a lot of color and background to how arrow functions work and why they were introduced. But in the next lesson, now that we've leveled up our JavaScript, we're going to be heading back into our React coding. For all of that and more, I'll see you there. Alright guys, so since the last time we worked on our Keeper app, we've learned a lot of new concepts such as props and mapping components and looping and React DevTools, arrow functions, map filter reduce. So let's go ahead and see if we can apply some of those things to improve our Keeper app. This is the Keeper app part 2, and you can go ahead and get hold of the starting code sandbox by going to the course resources. If you want to work on your local copy, then go ahead and download a copy of it and then run npm install as well as npm start in order to run it on a local server. But if you're working on it in Code Sandbox like I am, then go ahead and just fork your own copy. The goal of this challenge is very simple. All we want to do is to render all of the notes that currently live inside our notes.js as an array called notes into our Keeper app as separate node components. This is going to use a lot of the things that you learned in the previous lessons, especially props and mapping. So this is what the finished app should look like. And when you go into the notes.js file, if you add a new entry, you should see it pop up dynamically like this. And this is all possible because you're going to be mapping through this array. Go ahead and pause the video and try to give this challenge a go. And once you're done, head back over here and we'll walk through the solution together.
Okay. Pretty straightforward. All right. All right, so first thing we'll want to be able to import these notes, so we have to export them. And then going to want to import them into the app, I believe. Oh, notes are already imported. Okay, wait, are they? No, those are components. Okay, so import notes from okay. know I'm going to need to map. Okay, what's in the notes array here? Okay. Header and footer are fine. It's the note component that we need to work on. Okay, what props does the note component have? None. Okay, so I think we need to give the note some props. And then this is going to be, let's see, how's it named in here? Title, content. Okay. Okay, so that's our note component with props. Let's move this over here. So now we need to map the notes array. I'm going to do it slightly different than how we just did it, just because I like it better this way. It helps me understand it. So let's make this, no, let's see. We need a new variable name. Well, I guess we don't need a new variable name because I don't even have to do it that way. But I want to. Let's call it all notes equals, let's see, that's the array that we want to map. I don't know. I don't like, I mean, I understand the need for arrow functions or the usefulness, but maybe because I'm still learning, but I kind of like everything to be more verbose so I know exactly what's happening. Map. I know she probably wants us to use arrow function, but I guess I can do it, whatever. Okay. Turn. Is it props? No, it's that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're referring to these in here. So key, title, content. Okay. Title. That title. And it's called content because that's what we called it over here. Okay. Okay, so all notes is now our array. So I believe I can just do that. And look at that. Easy peasy. Okay. Think I got it.
All right, so first let's head into our components folder and take a look at our app.js. Here we've got the note component being rendered, and we're only asking for one of these components to be rendered. Now, at the moment, this component is completely hard-coded. It has a set phrase for the H1 and a set phrase for the paragraph. Now, that won't do if we want to use our custom notes from our notes.js. So first, let's go into our app.js and pass it some custom props. So the kind of things that we probably want to customize is the title of the note and the content of the note. So let's just create a prop called title and a prop called content. Now, I'm just going to go and move this existing title and existing content over as the values of those props, like so. And this way, when I go ahead and look inside my React Dev Tools, inside my note component, I'll be able to see that I've got two props being passed over to the note component, which I can then pick up inside my note.js. So inside my note function, which is being called effectively from my app.js, I can receive some properties. And this object props is going to contain both of these properties, title and content. So I can now insert it into my H1 inside a set of curly braces, and I can inject that as props.title and do the same with my content. So props.content. And these two properties should in fact work when I pick up my note because I'm using the right names of the properties. And frequently you get mismatches in terms of typos when you're trying to access a property and you miss out on the content, or you get typos when you are passing a prop over in terms of the key and you get missing content. But with our React Dev Tools and being able to view the props, it should help us debug any issues on that front. All right, so now that we've got our note rendering some custom content using props, we can now think about how we can render multiple notes, because our notes.js has lots of different notes with different titles and different content. One way is we could create lots of these note components, but of course, now that we know all about the mapping strategy, then the easiest way is to use the map function. In order to map through the array of notes, we first have to export it from this file where it lives. So export default notes. And then let's go ahead and catch it over in our app.js. So let's import notes from /notes. All right, so now that we've got access to this array called notes, and we can log it to see its value, which is just currently 4 objects with different titles and content. Given that we've got this array, we can then go into our app and replace this single note with a whole bunch of notes generated from a map function. So let's go ahead and tap into the notes array that we just got hold of, call the map function, and inside the map function, we're going to pass it a function that is going to create notes. So this create notes needs to get a single note item passed into it. And once it does, though, it's going to return a note component that is going to have some props being sent over. Remember, the props that we defined previously were title and content. So let's add a title prop and let's add a content prop. So the title is going to be based on the note item that gets passed over to this function.
Yeah, did this already. I understand. Okay, is there anything else?
Remember that whenever we want to map or loop through an array in order to create dynamic...
Yeah, she just did it here without creating a separate array variable, but I like creating the separate array variable.
React components, such as these notes, so there can be no note component that has the same key. Luckily, inside our set this...
Yeah, I got the key already.
Now, this function, full line of code, everything still works exactly.
Okay, yeah,
rendering.
I got it.
For all of that and more, I'll see you there.
Oh, ternary operator. That's the question mark thing. That's confused me before,
Hey guys,
but
in this lesson, we're going to be creating a login flow. And very often when you're creating these kind of screens, you'll want to show different components depending on whether the user was logged in or if they were logged out. So for example, if they were not logged in and they go to your website, you probably want to show them the login screen like this. But if they were logged in, then maybe you would want to instead show a different message or a different component. And that's the goal of this lesson. We're going to learn the techniques to show different React components depending on some sort of condition. In this example, when the user is not logged in, we show them the login form, and if they are, we simply just greet them. This is what we're going to be building, so head over to the course resources and get hold of the starting sandbox and then fork it.
You know what? We should get a little machines going here. Do I even have Winamp anymore? Okay.
بصلاح الدين أرى أسدى ستصب بحال أجدى لستم أكفاء لنا والله ولو كنتم أكثر عدا فجئتم مثل قطيع لا لست أرى لكم جندا.
Didn't do a playlist. Okay. Can't queue. There we go. There we go. That's better.
بصلاح الدين بصلاح بالله درب معسكر الأرض رددوا الله أكبر إنه النصر لها خلافة البشرى ووعد.
There we go. That's a little better. A little more pleasant while you're watching me do this. All right.
All right, so if we take a look inside the components folder, you can see that there is a single app.js. And let's say that we had at the top here a variable, right, called is logged in, and we set it to false to begin. And once the user goes through authentication, then this variable gets switched to true.
Let's start this over.
Hey guys, in this lesson, we're going to be creating a login flow. And very often when you're creating these kind of screens, you'll want to show different components depending on whether if the user was logged in or if they were logged out. So for example, if they were not logged in and they go to your website, you probably want to show them the login screen like this. But if they were logged in, then maybe you would want to instead show a different message or a different component. And that's the goal of this lesson. We're going to learn the techniques to show different React components
No, I don't like
depending
that.
on some sort of condition. In this example, when the user is not logged in, we show them the login form, and if they are, we simply just greet them. This is what we're going to be building, so head over to the course resources and get hold of the starting sandbox and then fork it. Alright, so if we take a look inside the components folder, you can see that there is a single app.js. And let's say that we had at the top here a variable, right, called is logged in, and we set it to false to begin. And once the user goes through authentication, then this variable gets switched to true. So what we want is we want to check the value of this boolean is logged in. And if it was true, we'd render this h1, and if it was false, we'd render this form. So how can we do this? Have a think about how you might be able to achieve this with what you already know.
Just an if statement, I guess. If is logged in, then return. Huh. It has to be an if statement, right? if true, return this. If not, return that. I think.
You might have thought of creating a function, right? So
No.
let's call it render conditionally. And this function is going to check to see if the is logged in is equal to true. But because this is simply a Boolean, which is equal to false or true, there's actually no point adding this. And we can simply just check it like so. But I'll leave it in for now to make it very, very clear that we're checking for a condition here. If logged in is true, well, in this case, we're going to return a h1 component, right? So I'm just going to cut that out from there and then return it here.
Okay.
But else, namely, if they are not logged in, or if this is equal to false, then we're going to return this form component instead.
But what does it need to be in its own function? Is that... Oh, maybe because... Is that because if statements can't go in the return because it's JSX? Let me ask AI here. Hmm. Okay. JSX doesn't support statements like if, only expressions. I can't remember what the difference between statements and expressions is. I think expressions return something, but statements don't. Yeah, expressions return something if statements don't. So an if statement can't be used in JSX. So I guess that's why she's doing the function outside of the app function. Okay.
Like so. And then inside our div, let's just make it a non-self-closing div. So sometimes when you hit save in Code Sandbox, it does these automatic formats, which can be helpful, but sometimes it's not. And inside this div, I'm going to open up a set of JSX curly braces, and I'm going to call my function render conditionally, and then add the parentheses to actually call it. So now if we take a look at our website, it shows the h1, which is meant to say hello. And this is because our isLoggedIn variable is set to true. Now, if I set it to false, you can see immediately instead of that, we end up with our username, password, and login form. So this is one way of achieving this, but you can see we're doing it in quite a lot of lines of code, right? And it's not the most elegant. Given that this is probably something we're going to be doing quite frequently in React, checking the value of a particular property and then rendering different components depending on the value of that property, there's some better ways that we can do this. To begin, it probably makes sense to extract this form component into a separate component by itself, instead of leaving it as just plain HTML, because this can be reused. And the thing you should always think about is that each component should have a single responsibility. And this comes from something called the single responsibility principle, which is something that's quite central to computer programming. I'll link to this Wikipedia article if you want to read a bit more about it. But once you're done, let's head back into our sandbox. And I want to challenge you to create a new component called login, which is going to contain this entire form component, and then create another component called input, which is going to contain each of these input components. And remember that the inputs have different attributes with different values, so you might want to use some props and make sure that you can reuse your input component. Pause the video and try to complete this challenge.
Create a login component. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. All right, let's try that again.
In React, checking the value of a particular property and then rendering different components depending on the value of that property, there's some better ways that we can do this. To begin, it probably makes sense to extract this form component into a separate component by itself, instead of leaving it as just plain HTML, because this can be reused. And the thing you should always think about is that each component should have a single responsibility. And this comes from something called the single responsibility principle, which is something that's quite central to computer programming. I'll link to this Wikipedia article if you want to read a bit more about it. But once you're done, let's head back into our sandbox. And I want to challenge you to create a new component called login, which is going to contain this entire form component, and then create another component called input, which is going to contain each of these input components. And remember that the inputs have different attributes with different values, so you might want to use some props and make sure that you can reuse your input component. Pause the video and try to complete this challenge.
Login component for the form, but an input component for the input. Interesting. Damn, I'm kind of tired. I'm trying to focus on this. Okay. Alright, well, first I gotta do what she did with this function here. So let's do.
مؤسسة أجناد للإنتاج الإعلامي تقدم أيتها الروح، أما آن لك الرواح؟ أيتها الروح، ملني التواني، أو عيش فاني، عجبت من سير العشاق وأنا التواق، فجد السير والنجاء النجاء، فجد السير والنجاء النجاء. أقول لها لا يا روح روحي جهادا في سبيل الله سوحي، أقول لها بخ يا نفس هيا أجيبي داعي الحق الصريح، فقد طال المكوث على البلايا، فجدي السير هيا واستريحي، ألا يا نفس يوم الروع جودي وحوزي الخلد بالبين الربيح، هنالك تضحك الدنيا ابتهاجا وتنتشق الربا عطر الجروح، وتفتر الكلوم مهللات تندي الأرض من طل ذبيح، فما من بقعة إلا تمنت عناق الكلم من ذاك الجريح، تعانق المواضي عاشقات، فتى الفتيان فتى الفتيان فتى الفتيان ذا الوجه الصبوح. شققت بسيفك
كدمي صفوفا من صفوفا. Okay, so that's working. Okay, what does she want now? Create a login component for the form. Create an input component for the input. So the form component is going to contain input components. Okay. So then I believe I need a form.jsx, import React.
مؤسسة أجناد للإنتاج الإعلامي تقدم
حسنية. Okay. And then, but that can only be, that can only return one thing wrapped in a div. So return div. And then we'll take the form and do that. There we go. Okay. So there's our form component. But then these need to be input components. Do I need props on this? I'm not sure. Oh, it won't hurt anything if I add it, but I don't know. Oh god. SubhanAllah. I'm tired. I thought I slept good. Apparently I didn't sleep enough. Oh god. Okay, I might need a nap later. What do you want, kitty? How much pets do you need? Sweet kitty. Okay. I wanted to have a separate camera for kitty cam, but apparently I don't have a strong enough processor for 2 cameras. Alright, what am I doing? Input component. Alright, let's make a new component. Input. Import React. Please get your butt out of my face, kitty. I don't have time to pet you right now. I have to work. I have to study. I'm tired of being poor. Okay. Function. What is this? Inputs. Props. Do something with that. Export default input. Okay, so what props do I need? Type and placeholder? Okay. So why am I blanking on how to do props? Damn, why am I blanking on this? I just did it. Let me go to my dashboard here. Kitty, would you move? God, you stink. I need to take you to get a bath. Ugh. Okay. Okay, that's what I'm missing. All right, so both of those are meant to be paragraph tags? No, they're meant to be input tags. But then
يا أمة الإسلام والتوحيد يلي على العزة لهم مرقى الدين يشكي من هلا التنديد
okay, I think I need to do input. Type is props.type. Wait, but we're just doing one. Okay. Yeah, that should be all I need. Placeholder. Props.placeholder. Okay, I think. Okay, so what we actually want here is an input. Oh, I gotta import it first. Hold on. Import input from Now we need the input component. Do I need a key for this? I don't think so. Type equals oh, right, because we haven't actually added it over there yet. Okay. Oh, the form needs a button. Oh, it's in there already. Okay. Isn't that basically the same thing? This seems kind of redundant, doesn't it? Does that mean I'm doing it wrong? That's literally the same thing, just with a capital I. I might be missing something. That seems a bit redundant. Okay, so I think if I get rid of that, that goes away. Form. Oh, how to import the form. Nothing was returned. Why is nothing returned?
مؤسسة أجناد للإنتاج الإعلامي تقدم نحن أساد النزال لا لن
I don't know what I'm missing. App is imported in index. Form is imported in app. I must be missing a step somewhere, but I don't know what it is. I bet it's something really stupid and obvious. Alright, let's see.
Alright, so it's always good getting more practice and getting more used to the syntax. Let's go ahead and start off by creating a new file, and I'm going to call that login.jsx. And inside this file, I'm going to import React from React, and then I'm going to create my function called login, and this is going to return that form component that we had from over here. So I'll cut it out from the app dot.
Oh, okay. Well, I called it a different thing, but essentially the same idea.
JS login, which is going to contain this entire form component, and then create another component called input, which is going to contain each of these input components. And remember that the inputs have different attributes with different values, so you might want to use some props and make sure that you can reuse your input component. Pause the video and try to complete this challenge. Alright, so it's always good getting more practice and getting more used to the syntax. Let's go ahead and start off by creating a new file, and I'm going to call that login.jsx. And inside this file, I'm going to import React from React, and then I'm going to create my function called login, and this is going to return that form component that we had from over here. So I'll cut it out from the app.
So far, so good.
JSX. And finally, we're going to export this as the default.
Did I forget to export? No. Okay.
Now let me head back into my app.jsx, import my login from /login, and instead of returning that previous long thing, I'm going to simply return a login component. That's the first step completed. And I've
Isn't that what I did? Oops. I mean, she called it. I'll call it login for. Whatever. She called it login. I called it form. But that's the same thing so far. Okay.
extracted the login component as a separate component. Now the next thing was to extract an input component so that we can reuse each of these inputs. So let's add the boilerplate. And this input component is going to return one of these inputs from my form, like so. And then let's go ahead and export it and import it inside my login.
Right, but you need two different input.
So now, instead of
components.
using each of these separate input HTML components, I'm going to use my input component that I created myself. And we have two inputs currently that we want to render. One has a type of text, the other has a type of password. One has a placeholder of username, and the other has a placeholder of password. So both of these attributes have different values that we need.
Did I forget to wrap it in a div? Is that what it is? Oh yeah, I forgot to return. That's the problem. Okay. I forgot to return. There we go. That's the problem. Alright. I knew it was something dumb and obvious. Oh god, I might need to go take a nap, bro. Oh. Damn, I woke up too early.
So it makes sense to create those as props. So we'll create a prop called type, and we'll create a prop called placeholder. Now the type for my first input is going to be text, and the placeholder is going to be username. And then I'm going to have a second input which has a type of password and a placeholder of password as well. So now I can go into my inputs component, catch those props that's being passed over, delete the repeated elements, and then change my type to use the prop. So add my curly braces and use my props.type and my props.placeholder. Now if we refresh our website, it should look exactly the same. But we've now separated our concerns so that we have the input component, which just deals with each of these input fields. We've got our login component, which has an entire login form. And then we've got our app.js, which has our conditional functionality. Now our code is a little bit shorter, but not much. One of the things I want to do is I want to be able to carry out this functionality in line, so at the place where I need it to be rendered, namely pretty much here. But notice how if I go ahead and delete where I call my function render conditionally, and instead I copy and paste my if statement into here, it's not gonna work. I get an error. And the problem is that, remember, when we use JSX, everything that goes inside these curly braces must be an expression. And this is not an expression, this is a statement. So if you recall, back when we first introduced JSX, carry out this functionality in line, so at the place where I need it to be rendered, namely pretty much here. But notice how if I go ahead and delete where I call my function render conditionally, and instead I copy and paste my if statement into here, it's not gonna work.
Yeah.
I get an error. And the problem is that, remember, when we use JSX, everything that goes inside these curly braces must be an expression. And this is not an expression, this is a statement. So if you recall, back when we first introduced JSX, I recommended watching a video which explained the difference between expressions and statements. Statements perform some sort of action, and common examples of statements include loops, switch statements, or if-else statements. Think about the ones which have a keyword. In contrast, an expression just resolves to a single value. Wouldn't it be nice if we could convert our if-else statement into an expression so that we can use it here? If only we had an expression in our JSX that still has the same logic.
Let me guess,
namely
ternary?
checking if our user is logged in or not. Well, luckily for us, JavaScript has something called the ternary operator. The ternary operator looks something like this. It's got a condition which we define, such as is sky equal to blue, or in our case, is that variable is logged in equal to true. And then we have a question mark. And after the question mark, we say, well, do this if it's true, such as render the h1. And then after a colon, we get to specify what it should do if the condition was false, such as rendering our input component. So for example, I live in London, so whenever it's cloudy, it's probably going to rain. So internally, I probably have a ternary operator in my brain, which says, if is cloudy is true, then bring an umbrella, otherwise bring sunscreen. So the syntax comprises of the question mark and the colon, and putting the conditions and the expressions in the right places. And that really is the beauty of this syntax. Instead of a statement, we now have three expressions. The condition is an expression, bring umbrella is an expression, and bring sunscreen is also an expression. Therefore, the whole thing is also just an expression. Let's go ahead and have some practice with this. In our case, the condition is this one right here that we're checking in our if statement. And then the thing to do if it's true is to create an h1. And the thing to do if it's false is to create a login component. We can refactor this if statement into a ternary operator like this. First, we have our condition which is being checked, which is this one right here. And then we add a question mark. Effectively, you could read this as, is logged in true? Well, if so, then let's create an h1 component. And then we add a colon, which means everything that comes after the colon is what to do if it's false. So return a login component instead. And now if I simplify this and bring it all onto one line, then you can see it looks like this.
Interesting. Okay.
If is logged in equals true, render an h1. If login is not true, then render the login component. So if I switch this now to a true, you'll see I get the h1 being rendered instead. And if this was false, then it starts rendering that login component. And in fact, I can simplify this even more because this itself is a Boolean. We can simply evaluate whether if this is true or false, and we don't even need this check. So try it out yourself and see this ternary operator in action. Now, sometimes you might not want to render anything at all if a condition is not being met. Let's say we create a constant called current time, and we set that equal to new date, which gets the current date and time, and then we call that function get hours, and this, if we log it, should now be equal to the current time. So in my console, it's reading 13 because it's 1 o'clock. Now, let's say I wanted to show the user a message depending on that time. I'm going to go ahead and comment out this line of code, which you can keep around for reference. But what I want to do is, let's say if the current time was after 12 o'clock, if current time was greater than 12, right? So right now it's 1 o'clock. Then I'm going to ask the user, why are you still working? So let's say I want to show this H1, why are you still working? And I wanted to show it as long as the time is past 12 o'clock. Clearly we're not working very hard here, are we? So how do I do this? Well, I could...
You know what? I think I gotta take a pause. I am like losing energy rapidly. I'm gonna have to go lay down. I woke up too early. I will be back.